call to order and roll call.
Commissioner Cox.
Here.
Commissioner Messersmith.
Here.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Present.
Commissioner O'Keefe.
Here.
Commissioner Minor. Commissioner Matlow.
Here.
The minor's here.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Williams Cox.
Here.
Okay, thank
Yep, we're good.
you. Commissioner Richardson, present.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Richardson's here. Did you get that one? Yes. Okay. Do I have any agenda modifications, Mr. Slay?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Going to move right on into number 3, public comment on items not appearing on the agenda.
I believe we have any public.
Okay. We'll move right on into number 4, consent agenda.
Move for the consent agenda.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Number 5, consent items pulled for discussion.
None of that?
None of those either. All righty. 6, roll call vote agenda items.
Yes, Madam Chair, just a couple of TIP amendments here, and I believe you all saw we sent out an updated sheet for one of the projects on Friday. We found a typo in the one related to the mast arms downtown. So, Susanna, do you want to cover these briefly?
Yes, so the TIP amendments were requested by FDOT. One project they have added, which is the resurfacing on Thomasville Road. The other project has been in a queue for a while. It's the replacement of 2 mast arms at Park Avenue and Monroe Street. The price that you see there is for the design of those mast arms, and they gave me a construction estimate for $1.6 million for construction and CEI. So we will follow up when we're developing our priorities and working on programming to see that that gets into next year's work program, hopefully. Requesting approval to ratify the resolution that the executive committee.
Can we do them in one motion?
Yes, ma'am. It just needs to be a roll call vote.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam. Thanks very much. And just a quick question for Zan. So on the 388 for design, can you get a little more detail? Can you provide a little more detail on what that entails? Because I'm not in the mast arm cost estimate business, but to me that seems rather high for design.
I will provide you this information. 20,000 of it is for FDOT's oversight and management of that project. The remainder is 368. And Brian, do you have any additional information you can help me?
I don't have any specifics, but it's not unusual when we do mast arm relocation or replacement at these intersections for cost to be in that area, because we do have to do an extensive amount of utility analysis and potentially relocation at that area. So, while I would agree it sounds a little high, it is in the normal range of what we're seeing.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Madam Chair, I would move both items. I have a motion to approve the TIP amendments.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Lori Cox.
Yes, vote in favor.
Commissioner Messersmith.
Yes.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Yes.
Commissioner O'Keefe.
Yes.
Commissioner Minor.
Yes.
Commissioner Matlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams Cox.
Yes.
Unanimously passes.
Thank you. Going to move to number 7, CRTPA action.
Ma'am, first item up are CRTPA safety targets. As you'll recall, this is an annual process we have to go through based on some federal requirements, and we take a look at some of our safety activities throughout the year. So I'm going to turn this over to Greg Burke for the presentation.
Okay. Great. Good afternoon, members. As you all recall, we are here today, as Greg Slay just mentioned, to adopt our annual safety targets for 2024. As you're aware, every year this is something we need to do to adopt safety targets for performance measures, specifically related to the issues of fatalities and number of serious injuries. To that end, CRTPA staff has identified the proposed 2024 safety targets for the CRTPA region. What you see there actually are a reflection of the targets that we adopted last year with a addition of a 5% reduction annually for each of the 5 targets. And this was something that you all requested be done in February, the February meeting of 2022. Additionally, last year, we recommended that the CRTPA adopt for last year's targets a long-term safety goal of 0 fatalities to bring us in line with the Florida DOT and their Vision Zero effort, and to actually have this target be achieved in 2040. So by annually adopting these safety targets, what it does is actually provide us an opportunity to assess how we're doing with regards to the most recent data, which is 2022, and this is data that's provided by the FDOT. You can see there that for the number of serious injuries as well as the rate of serious injuries, we actually met that target for 2022. However, for the 3 remaining targets, we did not. Diving a little bit deeper in terms of long-term safety trends for serious injuries and fatalities, you can see that generally serious injuries have been going down and decreasing, and they did specifically for 2022 versus 2021. Fatalities also decreased in 2022 compared to 2021. Most recent FDOT data reflect actually an increase with regards to pedestrian and bicycle serious injuries and fatalities, 47 in 2022 compared to 39 in 2021. However, actually updating this information to 2023 through use of Signal 4 analytics, we are able to actually break out that safety measure by mode as well as incident. And what you can see is that in 2023, i.e. last year, a couple months ago, pedestrian fatalities in the 4 county areas actually greatly increased to 18 from 11 the previous year of 2022. Bicycle fatalities also sadly increased last year, 2023, to 4 from 2 the previous year. With regards to updating serious injury data for pedestrians as well as cyclists, you can see that pedestrian serious injuries actually decreased last year. Bicycle serious injuries increased. Now, one of the things that adopting our safety targets every year allows us to do is not just adopt those targets, but to take a deeper dive into what we are doing within the 4 county CRTPA region in terms of addressing the issue of safety. So what I'm going to do is just briefly go over a sampling of some of the efforts that are underway in the region. Some of these efforts are CRTPA efforts. They're also efforts by our partners, and I'll point those out. The funding of key sidewalk projects. What you see there, North Monroe Street, Paul Russell Road, Old St. Augustine Road, all 3 of those projects recently received construction funding for about $10 million to construct those needed sidewalk projects. And by construction funding, as you all know, being familiar with the transportation planning process, that's the final phase of a project actually getting built. So that's a good thing. These are projects that are underway to be constructed. Moving forward actually to safety with regards to schools and school access, our partners, Leon County and the City of Tallahassee, are working currently, have sidewalk projects under construction to improve safety for students going to Fairville Middle School, specifically sidewalk projects on Tram Road and Zyla Street. This is in the southeastern portion of Leon County, City of Tallahassee. Other ways the CRTPA region is actually addressing safety is through community events, going out into the community. Some of those include helmet fitting events that we work along with our partner agencies, including the ARPC. And Recent activities associated with that even included coordinating, Suzanne Lex here to my left actually worked on coordinating a training for helmet fitters in Wakulla County. And what that means are folks down in Wakulla County that now can train to fit helmets at events down there. So that's a good thing. Safety studies. Many of you recall that in June of last year, the CRTPA adopted a SS4A action plan, or Safe Streets and Roads for All Safety Action Plan. What that did was actually took a deep dive into the CRTPA region, identifying what type of projects and needs we had, specifically through identification of something called high injury network roadways within the region that actually had rates of safety concerns. The idea behind that was to actually set us up for moving forward and looking at specific projects in the region that we could go forward with. One of those was actually discussed at last month's retreat, the North Monroe Street Safety Implementation Plan. North Monroe was actually identified in the Safe Streets for All plan as being on the high injury network. So we initiated that project. The idea behind that project is to take a little bit closer look at the corridor and to actually identify potential specific improvements to then wrap that up in a package to submit for federal funding to actually implement that through the SS4A grant program. CRTPA school safety study, that was initiated last year in December. Again, something we discussed at the retreat last month. That is actually looking at safety needs for targeted schools, the most needed schools within the CRTPA region. HVE, high visibility enforcement. This is an effort currently going on in the region being conducted by Tallahassee Police Department as well as the Leon County Sheriff's Department on those major roadways you see. This is actually an effort to protect the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians on high injury corridors throughout the region. This effort is something that's going on currently and is scheduled to end actually in May of this year. But this is something we've been doing for probably the last 4 or 5 years. It's an annual effort. That's an FDOT initiative. Regional trail expansion. The CRTPA has been active in actually doing feasibility studies for a number of trails throughout the 4-county area here. Most recently, we did studies for the Tallahassee to Havana Trail, as well as the Wakulla Springs Trail that was presented to you a couple meetings back on State Road 267 in Wakulla County. In order to get these projects moving forward with funding, we've actually been submitting, and we did this in December, a number of applications through the Florida Sun Trails program to get funding for various phases of those programs. So we're waiting to hear back on our success on those grant applications. And then finally, CRTPA safety page. If you've been on our CRTPA website recently, you've seen that, I believe it was in August of last year, we actually created a specific CRTPA page called the safety page that would highlight safety within the region, general statistics that we update, as well as perhaps more importantly, some of the projects that are underway and how visitors to the website can get some more detail on that information. Kind of circling back to why we're here today, as I mentioned earlier, we're here to actually adopt the 2024 proposed safety targets for the CRTPA region. Again, these targets reflect a 5% reduction from what was adopted in 2023 in those targets. Additionally, we're recommending that the CRTPA include a recommendation of ultimately seeking 0 fatalities and serious injuries in the region by 2014. And with that said, I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. Not necessarily a question, but one of the things that I want to suggest that we add as well is that TPD also provide lights for bikes for those bicyclists who are found without lights out there. I think they've been doing that for the past few years. So in that arena, we want to add that.
Good information.
Another safety information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is this about NIMS?
Well, I was going to bring that up because it is really being used. I mean, I'm so proud of that. I tell you, I come through there and the school actually even now has a crossing guard.
They do.
that brings the kids across the crosswalk. I'm telling you, we saved some lives there, y'all. Be proud of that one. But Greg, when you look at the accidents, do they do an analysis to determine the cause of the accident? Was it motorist caused primarily or pedestrian?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned that we updated the most recent FDOT data, which is 2022. Generally, it's a 2-year lag. So we updated that to 2023 to get more recent data. And that was through Signal 4 Analytics. And the CRTPA actually has access to go to Signal 4 and to actually look at the reports and do a deeper dive. Probably about 2 Junes ago, Jack Castrua, who is actually not at today's meeting currently, but he did a real in-depth analysis of the CRTPA region and specifically going through the accident reports and looking at the details. One interesting thing is often when you look at the accident reports, some of the data that's in there, it's hard necessarily to find easy trends, and some of the reports are a little bit more detailed than other reports that are in there. But yes, certainly we are taking as an agency a deeper dive to locate where these accidents are happening and what could be done to potentially prevent them. It's a little discouraging because, for instance, mapping some of these locations, let's take pedestrian fatalities, for instance. One of the hotspots locations is Appalachia Parkway and Capitol Circle east of town. And you look and some of where those fatalities are, they're not actually at that location, and they're scattered a little bit, after, before. And when you look at, well, what easy things can we look at to prevent some of these accidents? Provide sidewalks, provide marked crosswalks. Often, some of those improvements very often are currently there. So this is such this is an effort safety that takes so many partners, so many factors involved with regards to speeds, with regards to roadway design, with regards to driver behavior, pedestrian behavior, cyclist behavior. That said, I'm going to turn it over to Greg, who may have a little bit more detail on that.
I think you got a lot of it there. I think, Commissioner, one of the things, what we find is it's a mixed bag of who's at fault. A lot of times with the crashes, especially with pedestrians and cyclists, there aren't necessarily charges. We'll see things, pedestrians walking in the wrong direction, not using, like Greg just mentioned, available crosswalks. So that is one of the struggles that we've had, is trying to nail down, kind of a silver bullet on a lot of these. And the other issue we come up with is they're so scattered. We can't look at a particular intersection. Greg mentioned Capitol Circle and Parkway. They're actually scattered half to 3/4 of a mile each approach on that intersection. So there's just not one thing we can say, we can do this, we can fix these. But I think when we come back with the North Monroe implementation study, you'll see some things there that are going to be specifically directed at trying to direct pedestrians to safer crossings, because that's one of the things we're seeing in that particular instance. Folks just cross wherever they want to. Yeah. And so one of the things we've looked at, we may follow something we've seen down in Orlando, where they've installed multiple signalized crosswalks and have actually installed fences in the median between those. So they've got no choice. Once they want to climb over the fence, they've got to go to a signalized crosswalk. So that's the kind of things that we're going to be looking at, I think, in a lot of these major corridors, is something to direct folks to a safer crossing.
And one thing, just real briefly, what we're seeing with regards to CRTPA region, particularly with regards to pedestrian fatalities, isn't a CRTPA region, abnormality. This is something that we are seeing throughout our country. And there have been a number of news articles written evaluating the situation of why we're seeing this. And bottom line, there actually was a really good, couple really good reports in the New York Times, deep dive analyses, and those reports spoke to a number of issues and factors, but there really isn't necessarily one of them. One interesting factor is with regards to pedestrian fatalities, the bulk of them are actually occurring at nighttime in darkness. And there's just some, anecdotal information. Maybe it has to do with land uses. Maybe it has to do with the type of people that are walking to the suburban areas, often workers that may not have access to, a personal car or something like that. So they're on some of the most dangerous roadways, which typically roadways further out in the suburbs tend to be ones that have more lanes, people driving safer. So there's a whole bunch of factors going into that.
I'm not sure who was first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the update. I'm glad we're making progress on the North Monroe corridor. Just a story, just yesterday, there's the merge lane right across from the Circle K. If you're headed southbound on Monroe, people are using it appropriately and merging. At the same time, people are walking on the shoulder where there's a lack of sidewalk. And so yesterday, after I merged, a gentleman tried to skip the entire line, probably going 70 around everybody. And there's a pedestrian right there, no sidewalk, no protection. Had I not slammed on my brakes and let him in, that could have been a fatality right there. So I think it's great that we're recognizing those spots that we can identify and addressing them. My second question is on our goals. It seems like we really lack a whole lot of tools that we can really put into place to guide what's going to happen, because the whole area is so wide and they're happening at different spots. But when we look at last year to where we didn't quite hit our goals, are there efforts this year above and beyond to justify reducing our target?
I think the direct answer is no. When we look at this, and Greg, pull back maybe the trend chart with fatalities. That's always been the nature of the fatalities, especially they're just completely random. Yeah, you can go back. There we go. We had a low, I think, in 13 of 38. That was after a high of 72 the previous year. I mean, they almost fell in half. But when you go back and look, there's just nothing that we can pinpoint that deals with that. In terms of meeting the targets, I'm not sure that we ever will, just because of the way we're required to address them. DOT actually, they did adopt the Vision Zero when the performance measures first came out. It was interesting at the time that Federal Highway actually had recommended that none of us adopt aspirational goals like that. They preferred that we adopt more of a hard number, and we felt that was better ourselves. This year, at least with the way we do it, every year we come back and have a deep dive into what's actually going on, and not just be able to say, yeah, we adopted Vision Zero, we're moving on. So I think the way we do it puts us at more, but makes us deal with it more directly, if that makes sense.
Sure, but I think there's still the public recognition that Vision Zero is all of our goals, whether we can. Sure. Next year we're going to get there. We're still pushing to reduce every fatality.
Right. I mean, I don't think any of them are acceptable, but just, as I've always said, you're dealing with people and automobiles, and just what you saw, a guy driving 70 miles an hour on North Monroe. That's the part we cannot control. And when we look at it, 99% of the crash reports that we look at, there's human error somewhere in it, whether it's a bicyclist, a pedestrian, or most often a motorist.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And Greg, I just want to, maybe I missed that information, but the data that was used for the charts is a combination of all 4 counties, correct?
Correct, yes.
And maybe I missed it, but I looked through the information. Were you able to break out any of the information between the counties? In other words, are there in particular hot spots, as Commissioner Richardson asked about what causes it? I certainly understand that there are a myriad of causes for these accidents. But Greg, are there any particular hot spots in Gaston County, in specific locations that you were able to discern that were troubled spots?
Yeah, with regards to pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities and serious injuries, we did not see any. But I mentioned, the Signal 4 analytics. There is actually a public site to that, meaning anyone can go on And it's really, we can send out that actual link, but there's so much information, and you can pull it up by county, and you can see, the public just doesn't necessarily have access to reading the specific accident reports, but that data is there, including the location where those happen. But I can provide you more information.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Greg, for this. These are very, very important issue that we continue to see. My only question is, what can we, I'd love it if we, next year, when we come back and do these goals, if we have broadened where we look for examples, or out of the box or unusual solutions to this. And so I just want to plant this. A year from now, what tactic or tool could we put in place with the next report that we haven't done before? I just want to plant that seed. Thank you.
And I can mention one thing, and we talked about this a couple of meetings ago. We've actually put together a safety roundtable to especially deal with bike and pedestrian. I mentioned the gentleman from the Florida State Communications Department. We actually had a meeting scheduled last month. The storm kind of messed us up on that. So we actually have our first meeting scheduled tomorrow. And the primary focus of that group is going to be kind of that out of the box, more so on the message side of it. One of the things we've talked about is everybody gets their information from different platforms, these days. So how can we kind of harness some of that and do some focused outreach on a lot of these issues?
On point. I think too, with the high visibility going to be taking place, that is kind of new and different. We should be able to see some impact of that, because I think that if the high visibility is there, I was traveling up 27 yesterday, going at a alleged rate of speed, and I looked behind me and saw a highway patrolman behind me. My speed somehow miraculously reduced. So I think that the visibility is going to be key.
Yeah.
The one thing I do want to mention, I'm sorry, on the high visibility enforcement, you can't say that really fast. We've gotten questions before, and I would say, even though it's listed as enforcement, they're much more focused on education. We've seen the statistics, and we could provide those in your packets next month. They don't write a tremendous amount of tickets on this, and a lot of times, unless it's just egregious, but more so it's an education opportunity for the pedestrians, the cyclists, and the motorists as well. So I'm not sure enforcement is a good example. It's probably education is a better example of it. But that's much more what they're focused on that as opposed to enforcement.
There's something about that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. There's sure.
Immediately.
Yes.
Wonderful. Suzanne, I know that these are probably cross-referenced, not in detail like Greg has gone into them today with regard to community safety. Always get the acronym wrong. The monthly meetings that each individual county has.
Safety team.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
These are overlapped with, some of the information is shared with them and vice versa.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. And we actually have invited your chair to come to a couple meetings here in Leon County. When we had some really good information, we wanted to make sure he could bring back to them. So, yeah, in fact, I have a
Who
meeting
is my chair,
tomorrow.
Little?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Madam Chair, I move for adoption of the recommended action option.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? This is not roll call, correct?
No, ma'am.
All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Telecommute study?
Yes, ma'am. Suzanne's going to give you a brief introduction, and this is a follow-up on the information that you saw at the retreat last month, and we are looking for acceptance of the telecommute.
Thank you, Mr. Slay, and thank you, Board, for this opportunity to introduce our consultant, Tyrone Scorsone from Kittleson and Associates. This information was presented, the draft technical report was a part of the January retreat. It is now finalized, including detailed information in the 4 appendices. The study was really an outcome of COVID. We all know that we were forced to pivot to telecommuting if you were in some sort of professional job, typically non-essential workers, during COVID. And a lot of people weren't prepared. They didn't really have a program in place and hadn't managed it per se. So it was reactionary. This is an opportunity to be proactive, look at telecommuting in our region, we gathered some information from stakeholders, collected data, looked at the future conditions if we were to implement, if it was to be implemented at a certain percentage of employees across the region, and then provide some information to both teleworkers and teleworkers and businesses on some of the best practices. So if you have a telecommute program in place, there's resources if you want to take a second look at it and improve it, and then be ready should you need to have a continuity of operations in the event of a disaster, or if you want to establish a program. So we provided that information in support for the businesses and for the workers of the region. And with that, Tyrone's going to go through the presentation, and if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Madam Chair and the CRTPA board, we refreshed this, so we talked about some of this, some at the retreat that we had earlier in January. Since then, we've finalized the entirety of the study. So I would invite you all as I'm presenting, if you have this open and looking at it and questions arise from the actual final report that's provided in your board package, freedom to ask as I get through the presentation any questions that might have come out of your review of the report separate from my presentation. We think about telecommuting, and a lot of different types of telecommuting might come to mind. I wanted to emphasize that telecommuting is not one uniform approach. It could be a hybrid work schedule, which I think in this day and age most of us are most familiar with, requiring a couple of days to come in person and allowing for working from home or some remote location for the remainder of the days. Remote work hubs are part of a telecommuting setup, which might work here within our 4-county area. It would provide the resources that you would need to get your work done at a physical place that was closer to the periphery. It could be in one of Gadsden County, Jefferson County, Wakulla County, or it could be around the outside of Capitol Circle, so not requiring those cars on the road, those commuter trips to come into the city center. What we did in this project, we wanted to first sort of determine what the current conditions were, and we collected a bunch of data as well as interviewed a number of folks and did an extensive literature review. We were driven by what Suzanne introduced, in that we had a basis, and mostly anecdotal, that during the pandemic we noticed that there was far less congestion. So we did a deeper dive there as well to kind of determine what the magnitude of the decrease in congestion was during the pandemic, to have some baseline understanding of how telecommuting could impact mobility here in our 4-county area. And then lastly, we identified resources that could be used for those who desire to pursue a telecommuting program that would apply to employers in the area and agencies as well. Telecommuting is a strategy of this bigger transportation demand management umbrella. TDM, we oftentimes focus on the provision of additional infrastructure to meet our needs, whether that's changing our operations, adding lanes, adding capacity, running more transit service. TDM is not that. TDM is looking at trying to lessen the demand on our resources, of which telecommuting is one of the many strategies. Some of the other ones that you're very likely familiar with are carpooling and van pooling, and other sort of incentives that try to limit single occupancy vehicle use. We put together a project working group as a starting place with a number of stakeholders from the region, representing some of the agencies in the region who are already practicing transportation demand management, representing the employers and the agencies alike. That project working group is identified there at the sort of middle to bottom of that slide. This group met at the very onset of the project to review the scope, to make sure that we were tailoring this to have a best outcome that would provide something tangible in the end that could be used for direction. And then we got together at the end, near the end of the project, to review the findings summary. In our literature review, most of you here would probably assume this, but we discovered that broadband access is essential, and that is a primary driver in allowing for telecommuting. If you do not have broadband access, or you suffer through any of the Teams or Zoom meetings with folks who don't, and who become very glitchy, freeze up, and can cause issues for everyone in attendance. There are some challenges for the folks who opt to telework, who stay home with socialization, challenges on behalf of the employers with productivity concerns. That was a primary theme that we've seen recurring over and over again. A little bit of pessimism, I would call it, in that the staff, the employees are out of sight, and how do I account for them working? Well, I know that they're working. We found in Miami-Dade, their MPO, that they estimated 30% of employees in that area were already working in a flexible schedule. So that, I'm not going to suggest that was 30% of the employees there were telecommuting, but they were working in some flexible schedule, which could have been equivalent of a hybrid work schedule, 410s, and telecommuting. But as a result of that preliminary assessment, they're actually moving forward with evaluating long-term strategies that involve telecommuting to decrease congestion there, which is some of the worst congestion in the state of Florida. We've also found that employers who offer telecommuting oftentimes were able to offer telecommuting as an incentive that rivaled salary compensation. Potential employees like to work in places where they have the flexibility to work from home. We here in Tallahassee actually have a number of employees in our IT and professional services world who don't even reside in our 4-county area, who are working full-time, 40-plus hour work weeks from places like Michigan and Maryland are two examples that I know for sure where telecommuting has afforded them those opportunities. And then lastly, the development process can incorporate framework to help promote transportation demand management. That can come in a number of different forms, one of which might be allowing for a lesser amount of parking spaces when permitting a new development. We met with the Office of Economic Vitality. Their scope of work in large part is to attract business to the area. One of the primary things that came out of the meeting with the Office of Economic Vitality was that they desired for a best practices type of toolkit that would then be something that could be given to people who are looking to move here so they can better manage their teleworkers. As Suzanne said, we kind of all were hit abruptly with the situation of the pandemic and then forced into telework, but institutionalizing it requires a little more guidance. So having that guidance readily available for future employers was something that OEV articulated that they desired. We met with the Florida State University, 2 different meetings with the folks there who are over their transportation office as well as the Human Resources Office. They have recently memorialized this telework program that's on the screen here, which is significant because FSU is one of our major employers in the region. At the time that we met with them, this was still a pilot program, and it was only, I think, after the beginning of this calendar year, so not really even 2 months ago, they memorialized a program that allows for eligible employees to work from home or an alternate location for 2 days a week. Learned a lot in meeting with the transportation office. As a former Florida State student, a lot of this wasn't offered to me when we went there, and one of them is paid parking. So there's a consistent struggle with students there, sort of trying to find available parking that is particularly within proximity to where their classes are. And what has happened now, they sell premier parking. The premier parking that was being sold last year, sold out on its first day. And it's a clear indicator that if they continue to expand that program, the demand is there. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the garages that are in key locations central within the campus become premier parking garages altogether. They're no longer free. There's a park and ride that's on the periphery, so those folks who would park over at Doak Campbell Stadium, free transit bus, and FSU students in general, similar to FAMU students, are offered transit free as part of their tuition, which we would hope would encourage the use of transit so that we're putting additional vehicles on the road from students, especially in the morning hours, as I think about 8 o'clock classes and that influx of trips competing with the commuters who are trying to get to work at 8 o'clock. FAMU, like FSU, when the pandemic hit, went predominantly to online courses. Similar to FSU, they've required everyone to come back to attending class in person, with the exception of those courses that were already in online format prior to the pandemic. FAMU doesn't have FAMU, at the time that we met with them, did not have a telework program. They were monitoring what others were doing to see about adopting such a program themselves. And FAMU, unlike a lot of other historically black colleges and universities, does allow freshmen to bring cars to campus. And that was a newer permission that only happened during, as a result of the pandemic. So there's an additional sort of slug of vehicles now on the south side that are on the roads that weren't on the roads prior to 2020. Our Regional Planning Council, Appalachia Regional Planning Council, has a program within it, the Ride On Commuter Services. I think most of you in here are probably familiar with this service. We interviewed them to kind of find out about the direction that program was going in, since that is our predominant transportation demand management system here in our area. In that meeting, we learned about microtransit, and they're actually providing services, picking transit riders up from their front doors, taking them to transit stops along Monroe Street, on both sides of Monroe Street, South Monroe as well as North Monroe. You would assume that carpooling and vanpooling would have decreased as a result of the pandemic for obvious reasons, and being in close proximity with strangers inside of a vehicle. And unfortunately, those numbers have not picked back up, which follows a bigger theme around the United States, with the exception of just a few cities. Transit and other shared mobility, it just hasn't picked back up since the pandemic. And lastly, in that meeting, we learned that the greatest commuter needs still remain in our rural areas. Within the greater Orlando area, there's a similar program called Rethink Your Commute. Florida Department of Transportation District 5 stretches from Polk County, Lakeland area on the southwest side, back northeast over to Volusia County, and Daytona, and all the areas in between, just to give you an understanding of what is represented by that District 5 geography. In that program, a little bit different in that they proactively go out and they have recurring engagement at the offices with the employers, and talk to new hires on a regular basis about the benefits of transportation demand management, hoping to get some of the folks who might have been recently hired to not establish a routine of commuting in their car by themselves every day, but instead to look at one of the transportation demand management options. They talked about making parking expensive, and how the city of Orlando actually currently pays its employees for not taking advantage of the parking that they offer. So they get that money back in their paycheck if they opt not to take advantage of the parking. We talked about our hybrid policy here, the hybrid policy there, and some of the same sentiment that we hear here is there as well, and I think this is commonplace and maybe throughout the state. And that is a push to get people back in the office for whatever reason. That was going on there as well. And we talked about if you are working from home, Lake Nona is an example, a model community that provides the infrastructure necessary for folks to work from home. That community was actually developed with the intention of having infrastructure in place, understanding its clientele, that it would likely have a large percentage of its residents working from home. We received so I went over the literature review, I went over the employers, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to talk about what's going on currently from the data that we've acquired. A couple of different data sources. Those data sources should be referenced in that report for you, but a lot of it comes predominantly from the census. This is LEHD data that I'm sharing with you here, and what we're looking at is commute patterns to get a better understanding of how commuters are moving between the counties and within the counties. We see that Leon County is the predominant magnet, the attractor of commute trips for all the neighboring counties. Replica data is a conglomeration of a bunch of different data points, including your cell phone data, including GPS data, including data that's coming from the census and other places. We are able to access replica data for a number of different purposes. We used replica data to make some determinations on who's already working from home. We're able to grab the data for these years with the exception of 2020 because there wasn't great confidence in the 2020 data, and so they did not make that data available for us to use. We were able to do that breakdown by county. Your aggregated figures are on your left, your by county breakdown on your right. We wanted to get an understanding and sort of looking at the traffic monitoring sites around the area to see, well, if we looked at certain years, are we seeing the decrease in trips along these roadways for those given years? We looked at Thomasville Road, just south of Bannerman Road, which is a huge commuter corridor for trips coming from the surrounding areas, but even from Georgia in this case. And that dashed line there represents March 30th, 2021, and that was the day that we associated with for this. Let me back up real quick. Portable count sites are one-day counts, so I want to caveat that. And so that was the day that the count was made and subsequently the day that we associated with the pandemic conditions. You see in the AM peak there a significant decrease in traffic. Here the dash line changes, and it's only because the 2020 date, so we use the 2021 date here because the 2020 date was too early in the calendar year. January was pre-pandemic. We went back and used not the 2021, but the 2020 date here from November of 2020. Again, you see the tremendous decreases on Capitol Circle Southwest. Just over in the area of Spring Hill Road is a portable traffic monitoring site where we see far less cars on the road in both this AM and PM peak. The permanent count station, so this data is a lot better. It's not a one-day snapshot. This is 24 hours in a day, and the data is actually compiled for a 365-day year. This is the portion of Appalachian Parkway that, as you approach the railroad overpass. Again, similar trend, that dashed line, it represents the pandemic year, and you see the significant decrease in trips on the road, helping further paint the picture of how telecommuting would impact travel on our roadways based on what we witnessed in 2020. So that was current and somewhat historic. We needed a tool to kind of look at what would happen going forward, and we used our travel demand forecast model to do so. Forecast model for most regions in the state of Florida. Ours is the Northwest Florida Regional Planning Model. It has ideally been calibrated for conditions in our local geographic area. We picked 3 different scenarios to model: a low scenario, a medium scenario, and a high scenario, and those percentages represent the percent of persons that will be working from home in each one of those scenarios. We loaded up a network that we wanted to be realistic. We didn't want to use this current roadway system that we are all traversing today. We used the 2045 network from your RMP, from your cost feasible plan, assuming that those roads will all be in place in 2045, so that we did account for that additional capacity that would be in place during 2045. There is an assumption within the model of everyone that is working, and this is, again, based on ACS data, that 3% of everyone that's working is already working from home. So to replicate the scenarios from the previous slide, we did 12, 17, and 22 respectively to get to 15, 20, and 25. Here are some results. This is the number of vehicle hours saved in a day, which is significant. Time is money. Saving time from sort of idling in traffic, from commuting a long distance, frees up your time to do more productive things. See, those numbers are a lot higher in Leon County. That's only because there are more vehicles in Leon County. If you wanted to see a more side-by-side comparison based on percentages and not sheer volumes, this is it. This is the volume reduction by percent by county for each one of the scenarios. All wasn't good. There's some obvious goods to telecommuting. There's some trade-offs, and so some of the benefits of telecommuting, I mentioned just a second ago, the travel time savings for the employees. What we all desire here is sort of ease of peak hour congestion. Economic savings for employers who can downsize their physical office space because they don't have as many people coming in, and that worker recruitment and retention piece that I touched on earlier. We did see that although persons might not be traveling in that time frame of 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning, or similarly, maybe they're not on the roads from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. in the evening, that if they're working from home, you do get an increase in discretionary trips. So you have folks driving at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and these other times of the day that you normally wouldn't have as much volume on the road. It allows for sprawl. Workers will tend to move away because they don't have to go into a physical space. Decreased demand for office space, sort of local economy, and for the surrounding businesses. If you were a business that heavily relied on a recurring lunchtime crowd from a commercial office complex that you're just adjacent to, now all of a sudden the place is a ghost town, and surely that's going to hurt your bottom line because people aren't coming in buying sandwiches and sorts at lunch like they once were. Costs and benefits side by side. There was obviously community benefits in addition to employer benefits. We talked about the decreases in congestion. As Greg sort of preceded this with a safety study, there's decrease in traffic accidents because there's a decrease in exposure. You're not out there to be involved in an accident. Decreases in fuel consumption. We found around the board that employees were more satisfied. Consequently, we reduced attrition. Employers save money. Some of the costs are predominantly with security issues, IT issues. There's a fear that your local network could get hacked. Might not be transmitting things in the same form or fashion that you would if you were physically in an office space. So we've seen there was a need for a lot of training on that and assuredness. OSHA concerns, I think some of that is a little bit far-fetched, but what happens when you're working from home and then you get hurt while you're at home? Who takes the responsibility? That is your employer liable. Equipment costs. And we talked in our interviews that I covered earlier, we talked with some folks who said, well, we're not going to have duplicative work desk setups. And if we're providing a computer and a monitor here, then they should come in and use them here. We're not going to pay for them here. And then also subsequently buy a second set of monitors and another computer for someone to use at home. So there is a equipment costs, varies by employer. Management mistrust, I think, is the dominant driver for even today pushing to get people back within the office. Lastly, we wanted to provide tools that could help for persons or for businesses, agencies that were interested in either adopting a telework program or furthering the telework practices that they might have in place. A lot of us, my company included, kind of have a telework practice in place, but nothing is formal. And So some of these tools we think maybe can help if you're going in the direction of trying to formalize such a program. Goals was a big part of it, being sure that this isn't just an arbitrary reaction, but identifying goals for why would you want to have a telework program in place. You all should have a full report there in your package. I would encourage you, there's a lot of details beyond what I shared in this handful of slides within the appendices. This slide looks like it ran a little bit off the bottom, but what key outcomes is a lot of what Suzanne introduced, in that we found that it is an effective PDM strategy. I think we all just saw that in the numbers that we looked at for the counters that we have around our area. Establishing telecommuting starting to become sort of more of a regular occurrence post-pandemic. Likely, if not for the pandemic, I doubt that we would be angling in this direction, but now we are moving in that direction more so. And guidance for employers is highly needed. There's still a need out there for even determining the types of positions that are eligible for telework, guidance for how to help employees with promotion and workplace socialization in lieu of sort of working from home. And then lastly, developing an evaluation framework so that an employer can kind of monitor their success with it, so that if they needed to pivot direction, they would have the indicators to do so. I mentioned the appendices just a second ago, and again, I would encourage you all, as your time permits, to look in there. Some of the guidance that I just talked about in appendices D is a good place to go. We put that together with the assumption that if someone wanted to go into appendix D, they could almost copy and paste some of the stuff in there to create their own policies, just to kind of lessen the work for anyone who's interested in doing this, make it as easy as possible. Pause there for questions.
Yes?
Thank you. This is excellent work, and this is the type of forward-thinking action from things that surprised us during the pandemic, and this is an impressive report, and I like the recommendations. First thing I had was a quick question on some data there in a table. There's a great table that shows a list of jobs that would potentially allow for some sort of telecommuting, and it lists 44,000. And then separately, I was curious where we're at now, and so how much could we expand? Somewhere else it mentioned currently 40,000. So am I understanding correctly that if we wanted to sort of get to our full potential, that we would be increasing by 4,000, or am I misunderstanding the two?
No. So I'll add to what you just said, Commissioner O'Keefe. So there's roughly 40,000 folks in the area currently telecommuting. We've shown in the information that Commissioner O'Keefe's looking at that there are 44,000 types of jobs here that allow for telecommuting. I would say that number might even be low. I'm not sure if there's consistency in the way that people responded to some of these census questions. And I think about the nature of a lot of what we do here in serving either the universities or government, and those types of jobs that are behind a computer are typically what I would think the kind of jobs that you would be able to work from home. So yes, that is the difference currently of what sort of types of jobs, 44,000 that are available to work from home, 40,000 folks are working from home, but I would think the potential from working from home is even higher than just that additional 4,000.
Thank you. Would it be appropriate for a motion now, or you want to wait till after discussion?
I'll wait until after discussion. Is that okay, Thornton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think with every meeting we have, or every seminar you see, or whatever, there's always a question about AI. Well, now's the time. You know, I know it's outside the scope of your study here, which is excellent, by the way. This is really good analysis, and I top quality. Really want to thank you and the firm for doing that. Based on your experience and what you know about AI and the materials you've read up to this point, do you expect AI to have a huge impact on telecommuting in the near future? If so, how? In other words, because that's something that we're all going to have to considering, and it may be outside the scope of what this project was, taking a look at this, but it will affect us. And so we have to figure out, you have to anticipate how that's going to impact the results of this study.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam.
I don't want to say something that is sort of against the whole concept of telecommuting. This is all just based on my opinion. I think that AI provides an advantage when you're telecommuting to sort of do some things on the fly that might not be reflective of the proprietary knowledge that whomever was seeking from you exactly. And so I might get in a position where I'm asked to deliver something, and because I'm not physically there, I'm in a Zoom meeting, I got both of my screens open, I turn my attention real quickly away from the camera, pivot, and then do something in AI to do a query, and then turn right back quickly and then give that answer that bot just gave me, which might be a great answer. But if I'm an employer, I wonder if on that same, on a fly, if in that same dynamic, if we're sitting around a room like this, I'm getting a better gauge for my employees' acumen by them sort of having that capability versus just quickly pivoting, checking AI for something, and then turning back and spouting out what the computer told them.
Well, thank you. I guess what my question really wanted to focus on is in terms of the categories of jobs, and those jobs that might be not susceptible, but good candidates for allowing telecommuting. With AI coming along, how might AI change those projections within those job categories? For example, might the introduction of AI into a certain industry create the opportunity for more telecommuting or less? And based on that, that's really what I'm trying to drill down to is to get a sense for, will it affect possibly the number of telecommuters we have in this region because of its use in some of these industries?
I haven't seen anything, Commissioner Minor, any studies on it, so I could only speculate. I tend to think it would. I tend to think it's just kind of that consistent move into computer type of work, and anything that you're doing, I shouldn't say anything, most things that we just do in front of a computer, if our 9 to 5, 8 to 5, consist of being in front of a computer, I think then would increase the likelihood of you becoming a telecommuter. If you have that sort of appendage to
Madam Chair, I think we need to be very cautious of AI because it is artificial intelligence. But when we begin to accept that artificial intelligence instead of the intelligence that's coming from you as a person, then I can see the telecommuting going down because it could possibly take that job away from that individual. Although early studies and folks are saying that it won't. But when you say you can take a bunch of planning documents that now takes months to get through, with AI, you can do it in an hour and a half. Seems to me that if you could do that in an hour and a half, you won't need a whole team of folks to do that. It takes months. So I think we just need to proceed very cautiously. And I know what you're asking, but it sounds to me like there is a potential to go either way. If you're adept and skillful in maintaining a programming for AI, yes. But if not, you could be replaced because we saw what happened with computers and how computers replace people in the workplace by, just a word of caution.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I know what you're saying. My question really was how it related specifically to this report and how it might change future projections of telecommuters. I know that what you're saying is something different about AI's, introduction into, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Greg and Suzanne and Jack are preferable to AI in any day, right? But
I don't know about that.
But my question is really about, how this might affect the numbers of telecommuters. That's really what I was drilling at. And it's hard, it's almost impossible to say, right? But I want to try at least to broach that subject because whatever comes will affect what we find here in the study.
Commissioner Minor, just a point of order, you didn't mention the attorney not being replaceable.
Because I didn't need to, it's implied, right? I'm just kidding. Listen, we could have a whole CRTP meeting devoted to AI alone, right? But I wanted to see, but But I just wanted to see what inclination you might have about how it might affect our actual telecommuting numbers here, but it's hard to say.
This is anecdotal. I remember maybe 20 years ago when I got here and sort of being around other college-age students, working in call centers was a popular job.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of call centers around Tallahassee where people would sort of juggle their time with going to class. And I think about now these bots that we're confronted with. A lot of times I'm on trying to do something, even on Verizon.com, something will pop up in the screen as an alternative to kind of let me chat with them instead of going through a call center, or even, unfortunately, when I call, I mean, it's pushing 0 doesn't work anymore. You get stuck with these bots. Potentially, and just thinking of this very specific example of kind of call center stuff, it could lessen the number of trips, but I don't know if it's, to Commissioner Cox's point, maybe it's because people are then out of jobs.
Exactly.
Because now these bots are sort of facilitating that call center function that the college students here are used to.
Yep.
Did you work with me at Dial America 20 years ago?
I know about Dial America.
Madam Chair, thanks for your indulgence on this.
I was actually wondering about artificial intelligence with regard to replacing commissioners. That would be.
It's only a matter of time.
Interesting.
Now there's, I'll be honest.
I really this, and you did a great job also at our workshop. I really appreciate this. I didn't know if this was going to be the condensed version today or the full McCoy, but I really appreciate this. Yes, ma'am. Anybody else? No?
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
That we accept the report and follow one of the recommendations by establishing an advisory committee with clearly defined roles and responsibilities that would include stakeholders and give a program legitimacy and visibility.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No roll call. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimous.
I'll just mention real quick, it was an article I was actually reading at lunch today from the Wall Street Journal. AI is starting to threaten white-collar jobs. Few industries are immune.
Yeah.
It was actually an interesting article.
I can see that. Once upon a, on that note, Craig, once upon a time, I told you I worked in the safety office at DOT. We had a room full of college students who took those crash reports and they coded them. Then GIS came along and they didn't, have to code them like that. So I'm sure there's a small group.
There's still
maybe
some that are in there doing it,
But we used to have lots of college students who did that.
Do that.
Yeah, we worked together.
Is that enough about telecommuting? I think so. So we're going to move to number 8.
Mr. Paulk has the floor.
Thank you. I provided a handout at everyone's location for an upcoming resurfacing project the department has scheduled on East Tennessee Street going from Monroe to Magnolia. In addition to the resurfacing project, we'll be replacing the remaining wooden portion of the retaining wall along that corridor. We'll also be making lighting upgrades at the Monroe Tennessee Street intersection. That goes to a lot of the safety concerns that were spoken to earlier. We found that improving lighting at the busy intersection is one of the best ways to improve safety at those high-traffic locations. We are having a virtual open house beginning March 20th. You can go to our Northwest Florida Roads website and pull up all the information that will be available, provide any comments to the department you may have. Again, that is scheduled for March 20th, and it's a virtual option only. With that, that concludes the department's update, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Paul?
No, ma'am.
Is that the Leo High School alma mater?
Sure looks like it.
I thought so. Okay, Mr. Slay, we're going to roll back to you.
Just a couple of things. I'd first like to introduce Mark Reichert, who's our MPOAC director. Mark made the mistake of saying he wanted to come over to our meeting today just to kind of hang out and listen, but I think I'm going to try to put him to work and see if he wants to talk a little bit about the legislative affairs right now that are going on. Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm sure most of you are paying attention to what's going on across the street this session. There are quite a few bills, transportation-related bills. Some of them have quite an impact on how MPOs are run in the state, and a great impact on my organization, the MPO Advisory Council. Those two bills, the Senate version is 1032, the House version is 7049. They are comparable. They're not identical as they make their way through the respective chambers. Originally, they both allowed the Florida Department of Transportation, based on some as yet to be determined metrics that the MPOs would have to meet, that if the MPOs did not meet a certain level of performance, that the Florida Department of Transportation could take over that MPO, with the district secretary becoming both the staff director of the MPO and the chair of the MPO board. I'm hoping that we had some impact in reminding them, I'm sure many of you have heard that old saying that those who fail to remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, many, many years ago, a lot of the MPOs did have voting members as voting members. They had district staff. That created sunshine law issues. The legislature quite wisely changed that to non-voting members of the MPOs. So we were able to bring that to their attention. That did come out of the Senate version of the bill. It's still in the House version of the bill. Surprisingly, the House version, which is really the one that we thought was going to be having the greatest movement this session, because that representative is the one that is really sponsoring the bill and had her colleague in the Senate pick it up as well. For the past 2 weeks, it's been sitting. It's made it through two of its three committee stops. That third committee does have a time slot for this Thursday. They haven't issued an agenda yet, so I don't know yet if they are meeting to take up, and number one, if they're meeting, and number two, if they are meeting, if they're going to take up this bill. The Senate version is on stop number 2. It's meeting. The Senate Appropriations Committee on Transportation, Tourism, and Economic Development is meeting tomorrow afternoon to take up that bill. But like I said, on the Senate version, they did take out that language that would allow the DOT to take over the MPO. But it still has a lot of stuff in there that allows the department to develop some performance metrics for the MPOs to meet. It does limit the creation of any new MPOs moving forward. It's been very, very difficult for us to try and figure out what exactly is driving this legislation. You talk to some folks in the process, and it would lead you to believe that many policymakers believe that there are too many MPOs in Florida. We do have 27, more than any other state in the country, but that's attributable to the way that the state of Florida grew. And 27 MPOs, 10 MPOs, 30 MPOs, I'm not sure what really impact that has on the process. There are many, many states besides MPOs. They also have rural transportation planning organizations. So if you throw those in the mix, then Florida doesn't even come close to having the same number of transportation planning organizations. Having said that, most of the MPOs in Florida today also believe 27 is enough. So I really don't think, even based on future U.S. censuses, that we will probably have any more. In fact, in years past, when a lot of the MPOs really didn't want to consider merging, a lot of them are having those talks nowadays. The 2020 census, there were no new MPOs in Florida. The 2010 census, there was only one. So I really don't think that that's going to be an issue, whether that language remains in the bill or not. I've heard all sorts of scenarios playing forward. There are really 6 different transportation bills between the House and Senate versions. The industry transportation bills are both moving on the Senate and House side. And then the department has its own transportation bills. And in the department's bill, there is some language in there that impacts the MPOs as well, as far as in the planning process, not including any non-pecuniary type issues as they move the planning efforts forward. One scenario I've heard is that the bills will eventually be merged by the end of session and either voted out with new language or just die on the vine. Again, at both extremes, depending on who you talk to. I've talked to lobbyists, I've talked to people, that work in the chambers across the street, and it's one scenario or the other. So it's really just wait and see how it all plays out. I'm hoping when the smoke clears that I'm still around. I've retired once. I wasn't really ready to do it again, but if that happens, then it happens. And I guess I'll stop there. Greg, I don't want to take up too much of your time this afternoon, unless anybody has any questions.
Yeah, Mark, I guess both the bills related to the stuff with the MPOs and DOT, they had kind of stalled for a bit and didn't get any activity until I think you sent something out Friday that it popped up on the Senate's.
I did, yeah. We really thought the Senate, if the bill was going to die, we thought it was going to die in the Senate, but now the Senate side's moving and the House bill seems to have been stuck. It hasn't moved in 2 weeks.
Anyone has any questions?
In the words of Elmer Fudd, you very, very quiet.
Yeah.
Again, I'm hearing it from both ends. You either be quiet and don't draw attention to yourself.
That's right.
Or just fight like the Dickens and try and get the language changed. It's been a balancing act this session. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for coming, too. Just real briefly, let you know, and Greg mentioned this earlier, the North Monroe study is moving forward. We'll be deploying, or the consultants team will actually be deploying about half a dozen or so cameras in the corridor over the next couple of weeks, basically trying to get a good feel for the pedestrian activity up through the corridor. As we mentioned, folks are just kind of crossing wherever they feel like it. So that'll feed into what we'll be looking at, as I mentioned earlier, to try to maybe direct some of those folks to certain points to be able to cross. And Madam Chair, that's all that I had.
Greg, about anything that you talked about today or in the past or in the future?
Yeah. Greg, do we have or can you give us an update on where we are with the widening of Orange Avenue from South Adams to Capitol Circle?
I can tell you it's still in design. I reached out to the consultant a couple of weeks ago to try to get together to talk about some of the safety-related issues that we've seen in other corridors and how we might incorporate some of those into that. We have not had a chance to meet yet, but the shorter answer, it is still in design. There's no right-of-way funds allocated nor construction funds at this point.
Any idea of?
No, sir.
I see some progress.
I don't know. If anything, we may see some right-of-way kind of in the outer years when we go through the work program process. Brian, I don't know if you've got anything to add, but it's...
Nothing other than it's been very difficult for us to get any capacity project moving throughout the district. So it's not like we're not giving Tallahassee any love. We have struggled with Pensacola, Panama City, and the Fort Walton Beach area. Just the cost increases, it's been very difficult. We're looking forward to moving that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I dare not let a meeting pass without bringing up my favorite subject.
Bring up the railroad.
You want me to wait?
Pay attention.
You want me to wait till the 11?
What's that, Greg, for?
So, a testimonial from someone who took Brightline from Central Florida to South Florida, and about what a pleasure it was and how productive it was, because they weren't driving, they were able to do work, Zoom meetings and all that kind of thing. I know where we are, but I keep mentioning it because closed mouths don't get fed. I have to keep mentioning it in every meeting. I got folks who mention it to me every chance we get. I've been invited to join the Amtrak fan group on Facebook twice. I'm resisting that. I don't, because I don't know what else I can do. But I just want to keep mentioning it. So if somebody out there is feeling sorry for us in North Florida and has some money that they want to come and invest, so please come to North Florida and help us move our issue of rail, even if it's just interstate, because you're thinking about Central Florida to South Florida, that's interstate, and we know it's private. So we're open to private entities coming to North Florida and helping us do some interstate. If you don't want to go from Pensacola to Jacksonville, how about from Tallahassee to Jacksonville? We'll start there. That could possibly help out, because I think that's about the distance of Central Florida and where it goes into South Florida. I think it's West Palm, Orlando. No, it's Orlando down to
Brevard, I
the Brevard.
I believe
Okay.
Brevard's the tie-in.
Well, down that way. So just mention it that hopefully we'll get some traction from someone who may be listening and may be interested in coming up to help us invest and convince DOT that it's worth the investment. Thank you.
I want to talk about the Mardi Gras train or whatever the name of it is, the location. Has it started?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like Commissioner Williams-Cox, I'm always happy to talk about passenger rail in the hopes that it will come here sooner rather than later. No new news from the last time I think I spoke at the last CRTPA meeting about this, about how, there are 3 states that are members of the Southern Rail Commission, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. We'd like to have Florida be a member of the SRC as well. But those 3 states, Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, have been able to work very carefully together over many years to basically reinstate what they're called. It's actually the new name, the Mardi Gras route, which connects, LA, going all the way through New Orleans up to Mobile, Alabama. And last I heard, it was going to run twice daily, which is different than the Sunset Limited, because the Sunset Limited was once, and it would arrive either early in the morning or very late at night. So that's why our ridership was so low, because it was unreliable. And the times for departure and arrival were so not conducive to use. So that should be starting up pretty soon. My understanding is that they had to work on some design issues with the Mobile train station to accommodate passengers, but that route is going to be coming from, again, connecting LA all the way up to Mobile, Alabama, which is almost right up to our state line. So I'm of the opinion that, we will get passenger rail in North Florida at some point. I'd rather do it within the next 3 to 5 years versus the next 20, because the economic benefit potential between that gap is immense. Not to mention the increased accessibility for evacuation routes should there be a hurricane, the additional transportation options for everyone, in particular vulnerable populations. So I think sooner rather than later is a good thing for all of us. But that new route should be opening pretty soon. And so when it does, I suspect, I hope, that it'll put additional political pressure on the state of Florida to join the SRC, which I think is the first step, and then start to work collectively with those other 3 states that are already members of the SRC to restore rail going from Mobile to Jacksonville.
Point of clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
For those who are listening, LA is
Or Alabama.
no.
That's all right.
I know
The City of Angels, Los Angeles.
Oh.
So, and we've had some discussions with legislators who have said, well, but the population center isn't here to justify the route being restored. To which I say, connecting Tallahassee with the populations of Los Angeles and the cities to the west of us, with the cities to the east of us. I mean, that's a large part of the country. So it's not just about the critical mass of population we have in this region. It's about connecting this region with the rest of the country. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Just information, we had some correspondence from Commissioner Hosmer that we put in there related to a resolution that was passed by the Jefferson County Commission February 1st.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say how pleased we are with the work that's going on Tram Road and Zyla. When I came to the commission, Zyla was almost a death trap for those kids attending Fairview. My daughter was in school there, and when she was in middle school. It looks beautiful. I think it's going to certainly encourage a lot more pedestrian travel along that corridor, and probably some development we're hearing that's going to occur. But with the sidewalks and landscaping and everything that's happening in that area, it's been a tremendous asset to the people who live in that part of town. Thank you for letting me bring attention to that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to give the board an update regarding the town of Havana and the reduction, the road reduction through Highway 27. I've had an opportunity to meet with the town of Havana, but just like many of the other counties, our conversation is overwhelmed with an insurance challenge because regarding fire services and the fact that we have a lot of volunteer fire departments and the county subsidizes, the cost of many of the fire departments. So that conversation was overwhelmed. Instead of talking about this particular issue, we sort of got sidetracked on managing that fire services issue. I think we're to the point where we can land that plane, and this week I plan to meet with the town manager and see if we can, so I can get a better grasp of, her issue and the citizens' issue in Havana, and I bring that back to the next meeting, or I have a conversation with Greg prior to our next meeting.
Sounds wonderful. Anyone else? Want a motion to adjourn?
Sounds good to me.
Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Same here.
Yeah, great job.
Sir, ma'am.